Sign up and like the end, and we're off, and so, the up and like the end, and we're off, and so, the third Vulcan on our list. Volcano Teide. Volcano Teide is one of the most amazing natural wonders that thousands of tourists come every year to see. It is the highest point of the island of Tenerife in Spain. In fact, its cone informs the island. The total height is 3,718 meters above sea level. Of course, in this respect, Volcano Teide is not a record breaker. For example, the same Fujiyama in Japan above it by 60 meters, and about the giant Ojos del Salado, rising to 6,891 m on the border of Chile and Argentina, there is nothing to say. However, this fact does not stop travelers who go to Tenerife in pursuit of a thrill. Volcano Teide is part of the national park of the same name, Parque Nacional del Teide, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In addition to the famous peak, you can see smaller volcanoes, which were formed by the release of lava through the side craters. They have separate names and are also part of the tourist trail. The debris of the rocks and streams of solidified lava, the almost complete absence of vegetation, the clouds of hydrogen sulfide escaping from cracks in the ground. No, this is not the setting for a new science fiction movie, but the real landscape of the slopes of one of the most famous active volcanoes in the Canary Islands, Teide. The park's moonscape is formed by volcanic tuff, a porous rock ejected from the mouth of the volcano Teide during an eruption. Wind and rain grind it down, creating sculptures of bizarre and sometimes fantastic shapes. These same architects create rocks whose names speak for themselves: the Finger of God, the Queen's Slipper, the legend of the demon Guayota. The natives of Tenerife, the Guanches, had their own version of the origin of the volcano Teide, which in their language was called Ikaide, hell or devil. So, according to legend, the mountain is inhabited by an evil spirit, the demon Guayota. It has always been a nuisance to local people, but one day it outdid itself by stealing the sun from the sky and hiding it deep in the crater. The people would have had no luck at all if it hadn't been for the creator god Akman. He freed the sun and imprisoned Guayat himself inside the mountain. But the evil spirit has not finally succumbed. From time to time it reminds itself of itself by streams of burning lava and puffs of ash. It slumbers, but it does not sleep. Currently, the volcano, which has a layered structure, is dormant. The last activity was recorded in 1909. However, Teide has not always been so passive and safe. For example, in 1706, during an eruption, an entire settlement disappeared from the face of the earth, although residents managed to evacuate. To prevent such tragedies are not repeated, a group of seismologists is constantly monitoring the state of the volcano, so you can safely pack a backpack and go to conquer the fiery mountain. Peak tide rises within the caldera boiler, formed after the collapse of the volcano Los Canadas. Its diameter is about 16 kilometers, and if you look at the island from the air, you can clearly see that Teide is two-tiered, even though the caldera walls have collapsed on the north side. Climbing the volcano. The first step is the trip to the bottom elevator station. This too is an unforgettable journey. Depending on the altitude and weather, the scenery is constantly changing. It leads to a winding road which can be covered by car or bus. I-342 from the station in Las Americas, and I-348 Puerto de la Cruz, departure 9:15, return 15:40. Those who decide to travel independently should check the routes beforehand and choose the most suitable one. Entrance to the park is free and around the clock. Detailed maps and all necessary information can be obtained free of charge at the tourist centers. Buses and cars will take tourists to an altitude of 2,356 m. Further road to the observation deck of Teide is possible in three ways: by cable car, on foot, by helicopter. The time of ascent in the first case is only 8 minutes, in the second a few hours, depending on physical fitness and availability of equipment. The funicular operates from November to May from 9 to 1600 hours, down to 1700 hours. Two-way adult ticket costs €27, children's ticket is €13.50, 3 to 13 years. For children free of charge. The upper observation deck offers great views of the peak and the park, and in good weather you can see the neighboring islands. From here there are several trails: to La Forel's Lookout, number 11, and to Viejo Peak, number 12, and number 3, Telesforo Bravo Trail, to the map of Teide Volcano. It is important to remember that these are only allowed to tourists in groups. If time permits, it is better to take one of the first trails first, as it will give you the opportunity to get used to the altitude. Above the mountains. Only Teide Peak Tenerife authorities fear corrosion of the rock, so restrict access to the summit, allowed no more than 200 people a day. To look into the crater of the volcano, you must have a special permit. To do this on the website www.reservasparquesnacionales.es, tourists fill out an application form, specifying the date, time of the visit, their contact information, series and number of passport, the number of people in the group. Permit must be printed out to show later at the entrance, along with your passport. The entire procedure takes no more than 5 minutes and is absolutely free. The ascent to the top will not take long, as it is only 163 meters from the observation deck. However, you should not hurry. On the contrary, experienced climbers advise making frequent stops and taking a breath to avoid getting dizzy in the rarefied air. You can use this time to take great pictures. Night under the stars, the first rays of the sun color the earth. The shadow of the volcano reaches the coast itself, gradually retreating before the onslaught of light. This is the spectacle you can see when meeting the dawn at Teide Peak. You can do this by staying overnight at the tourist base Alta Vista, located on the slope of Teide at an altitude of 3,260 meters. It costs €25 and visitors no longer need permission to climb. To make it in time for sunrise, you have to leave at 6 o'clock. Another reason to stay overnight at the base is the meteor shower. During the last days of July and early August, hundreds of shooting stars illuminate the night sky. Memo to summit conquerors: Volcano Teide is part of the national park of the same name. Among other things, this also means that it is protected by law. In its territory you cannot make a fire unauthorized, plucking plants, collect rocks. The last point is not a joke, but a rather serious regulation. Tourists in pursuit of souvenirs can pose a real danger to the park. After all, if each of the tourists takes away with them a pebble, in a few decades the main attraction of Tenerife will simply not exist. Because of the pressure drop, many unprepared tourists can get mountain sickness. You can somewhat improve the situation if you make frequent stops while climbing. Small children and people with cardiovascular disease is better to refuse such a trip. It is forbidden to go off the hiking trail. Lost tourist will have to pay a rather large fine. Preparing for the ascent, it is important not to forget to take warm clothes. At the temperature difference, depending on time of day, the difference can be up to 20 degrees Celsius, jacket and pants will be indispensable. Also at altitude, headgear and sunscreen are not superfluous. The number of parking spaces at the foot of the volcano is limited. If you decide to buy a car to get to the cable car, it is advisable to leave early. Because of strong winds or snowfall, cable car may not work. Therefore, before leaving, it is worth checking with the station. You can do this by calling +349 220 10445. The best time to take the funicular is right after the opening or in the afternoon, so you don't have to stand in long lines. Just a reminder, please like and subscribe.